Hi kids, it's Mrs. Fravel. How are you? Sounds about right. I'm fine. Thanks for asking. Okay, today we're going to talk about what happens after a plant or another autotroph makes glucose from the sun. What do they do with it then? How do cells actually get energy out of sugars? Okay? All plant and animal, all eukaryotic cells do this process we're going to talk about today, specifically cellular respiration, our favorite topic in terms of talking about the organelle that does it, which I'll talk about. So we've talked about photosynthesis, both the light-dependent phase and the light-independent phase. The light-dependent phase of photosynthesis does what? That's right, it stores electrons. And then what does the light-independent phase do? Yeah, it constructs sugars. It puts those electrons into sugars, onto a carbon ring, and stores that potential energy as a chemical energy in the plant's tissues. Okay, so then what? How does that stored sugar actually get used by a cell? Let's take a look. Okay, all right. Making ATP is the next step. And again, this is done in both plant cells and in animal cells. And technically, cellular respiration is the breaking down of that sugar, of the glucose, to make ATP, which is an energy providing molecule. And this is, again, in all eukaryotic cells. They have that wonderful little organelle. Why do we call the mitochondria the powerhouse of the cell? Because this is what it does. This is the process of the mitochondria being a little powerhouse. Okay? So in a eukaryotic cell, we're mostly going to talk about animal cells when we talk about this, but this is plants doing this as well. Plants do both photosynthesis and cellular respiration all together. They make their own sugar. Animals have to ingest that sugar. We have to eat. Heterotrophs eat energy. So that's why they have to eat energy. They get energy from the glucose molecules that are stored and made by plants. Okay? And with the combination of that glucose and oxygen, to inhale oxygen, and your cells then use that oxygen and combine it with the glucose, do some enzymatic magic, and they produce ATP molecules for energy. Okay, so the equation for photosynthesis and respiration are pretty close. They just run backward. So remember the equation for photosynthesis? It's the opposite in cellular respiration. So cellular respiration is one molecule of sugar, which its molecular structure is C6H12O6, one molecule of sugar, plus 6 oxygen molecules, plus 6 O2, plus some ADP. That's hanging around in there, and we talked about how ADP is like an uncharged battery. It is just a molecule waiting for more electrons to be put into it. So inside the mitochondria, that is where that is happening. It's taking sugar and oxygen and using some enzymes to turn this ADP into ATP. The byproducts of that process are 6 carbon dioxide. My formatting is a little off on there. Sorry, that dioxide should be underneath the word carbon. Get a little OCD about that sometimes. Darn it. Okay. The waste products of cellular respiration, what is released and not used, is 6 carbon dioxide molecules and 6 water molecules. And then this is the important part. 36 ATP molecules, all charged and ready to give the cell some energy. So again, what are the reactants? Reactants react in a reaction. They're what go into a reaction. So the reactants in cellular respiration are, go ahead, yes, sugar and oxygen. Okay? What are the products? The products are what come out the other side. The products are carbon dioxide, water, and ATP. This happens, of course, in the mitochondria of the cell. I'll talk more about that in a sec. And carbon dioxide and water are the byproducts and are released from the cell as waste. So here's where your respiratory system comes into play. So when we talk about cellular respiration, it is on a cellular level. Every cell does this. Some cells more than others. It depends on what the cell's role is in the tissue of the multicellular body, if it's in one of those. Your respiration is related to cellular respiration because how do you get oxygen? Right? You breathe in. You're providing oxygen to your body's cells to give to your mitochondria to use in cellular respiration. That is why you breathe. Okay. Why do you exhale? What do you exhale when you breathe out? That's right. You are exhaling carbon dioxide, and that is the waste product from all of the cells in your body. They have been transported by the bloodstream. That's what your bloodstream does. It absorbs the wastes from your cells, both carbon dioxide and other metabolic wastes. It absorbs all of that from all of your cells, and it carries it to the lungs, and it diffuses through your lungs just like any other diffusion, and is then exhaled when you breathe out. Oxygen is the opposite. You breathe in oxygen, it diffuses into your bloodstream through the walls of your lungs and then travels through your body via the bloodstream to be absorbed by your cells, to be used by your mitochondria. Pretty neat. Pretty cool. Okay? That's why you need oxygen. Okay, so where does this happen in the mitochondrion? Remember, one of these little powerhouses is a mitochondrion. More than one of them are mitochondria. It's one of those pluralizations that's super fun to remember. Okay, so mitochondria are a little organelle that are kind of like their own little cell, and there's a theory about that that I won't go into now, but is kind of fascinating. Each one of these little organelles has its own DNA and its own functionality inside the cell. So they are constructed of an inner membrane. And let's go from the outside in. That would make more sense, Frable. They have an outer membrane, and then they have an inner membrane. So they have a double membrane, and then they have a folded layer inside of their little mitochondrion body that is separated into cristae and matrix, and the matrix is the inner compartment with the squishies. Sorry, fast finger click. Make sure you know the difference between, or what you know. Oh, wow, I'm fine. Make sure you know these words. Aerobic, that is a process that uses oxygen. So these guys are aerobic process runners. Mitochondria need oxygen to do their job, so this whole process is called an aerobic process. Glycolysis, and I'm sorry, I think the video is cutting that off. Glycolysis, let me see if I can fix that. Hold please. Hey look, I fixed it. Okay, so glycolysis is a process that happens during cellular respiration where it's the breaking apart of glucose. So glyco is sugar. The word part glyco means sugar. Lysis means break. We talked about cells lysing when they get hypotonic. So glycolysis is the process that uses oxygen to break apart glucose into ATP in that equation that we already talked about. Okay? So again, it must have oxygen in order to work. That's why you have to breathe. That's why if you don't breathe, you die. It's because your cells run out of energy, literally. Mitochondria use glucose, and where do we get glucose again? Where is glucose made? What's the process? You're right, photosynthesis. That builds those glucose molecules stored in a plant. If the cellular respiration is happening in the mitochondria of a plant, it goes ahead and just uses the glucose that's being produced by the chloroplasts in that same cell or within the body. Any extra glucose then is stored in the plant's tissues, and that's where we get it when we eat, right? We did that your energy food web where you had to trace all of your food that you had eaten back to its plant source and then back to the sun. Remember that? If you don't and you didn't do it, you should do it. Oh, never mind. It was on last quarter. So the mitochondria use the sugar that's ingested when an animal or a heterotroph eats sugar. That's the source for that. So you have to eat sugar, you have to breathe oxygen. That's how you get the two reactants for cellular respiration. Okay? So it uses the electrons from glucose and oxygen to recharge an ADP molecule and turn it into an ATP molecule, and that ATP is now available for the cell to use for energy and in its metabolic processes. This is how cells run. Okay? This is also, again, fancy word is glycolysis, and the net result every time a mitochondria does this cellular respiration cycle, it nets 36 ATP molecules. Okay? Any questions so far? Remember, if you have questions, and obviously you're not in class, so you can't raise your hand and go, Frabel, I have a question. Please email it to me. Write it down while you're watching these videos and then email me your questions. I'm happy to answer them because you're probably not the only one that has the question. Okay? And you should have been filling in your note guide. I should always mention that at the top. But you should just know that you should be taking notes. Okay. And the note guide's linked with this. Okay. What else? Oh, so on your notes you should have this diagram. You should fill it in, please. Again, I will format the notes if you can either print out the notes to fill them in, or if you fill them in on Google Doc, you just click on the little box that's covering the words that you see on my screen. Click on that box to edit it, and you can put in the words. So again, this is just a nice graphic of how it works. We've got our mitochondrion. I didn't type that. It should be mitochondrion. And the reactants that go in to cellular respiration are oxygen and glucose. C6H12O6, that's the glucose, plus 6 molecules of oxygen go in, and out we get carbon dioxide. You get energy, ta-da! 36 ATP molecules. And then you get water as well. And when you exhale water. You produce water. That's why when you go outside on one of our delightfully chilly days like today, and when you exhale, you see a cloud in your breath. That's the water freezing. Okay? Okay. Any questions? Great. All right. Here's some fancy, let's kick it up a notch type of thing. Okay, cellular respiration is got fancy names. It's also called oxidative phosphorylation, or is named the Krebs cycle. And it's a process in which ATP is formed by passing electrons from one electron carrier molecule to the next. So this happens inside of the mitochondria. Okay, so these little proteins are electron carriers, and they sit in the membrane that's inside of the mitochondria, the little twisty one. So there's an intermembrane space and the mitochondrial matrix. And those electrons that were broken off of the oxygen and the glucose get passed along, and they build up as they go. They build up more and more energy until they hit this is more than you guys need to know, till they hit a certain point, and then they are transferred into ATP. Okay, again, in the mitochondria, and this is the major source of ATP in all aerobic organisms, plants, animals, and fungi. Okay, also some other ones, single-celled organisms as well. Okay, any questions? All right, so, but sometimes there's no oxygen to be had. Sometimes it happens. There are some organisms that don't do aerobic respiration, and you and other animals are also able to do cellular respiration anaerobically. If there's no oxygen, the mitochondria can still do some things, okay? But it has to shift gears a little bit. It has to do a different job. So it can use a process called fermentation, and this process is an anaerobic respiration because it doesn't use oxygen. It does this process usually only when oxygen levels are very low. There's not a lot of oxygen available, and it produces much less ATP. It only makes 2 ATP molecules instead of the regular 36. So for most organisms that do aerobic respiration, that do cellular respiration, this is an emergency only type of deal. They only make 2 ATP instead of 36. And so it's not one that is counted on a lot unless you're a yeast, and then they do it a little bit more. There are, again, 36 versus 2. Okay. There are 2 types. Oh, where am I going? I'll go down here. 2 types of fermentation depending on what kind of organism, heterotrophic organism you are. Alcoholic fermentation and lactic acid fermentation. So when you do regular aerobic respiration, those byproducts are carbon dioxide and water, right? But when it turns into anaerobic respiration or fermentation, the waste products are different. You only get the 2 ATP, and instead of carbon dioxide and water, it's carbon dioxide and either alcohol or lactic acid. Alcoholic fermentation, this is done by yeasts. Yeasts and fungi. Yeasts are little single-celled, similar to fungi cells. So these guys do anaerobic respiration, and we use these in order to make that delightful substance, bread. You put yeast into bread dough, and you give it some sugar, and you give it some warmth, and you mix it into the dough, and you let it sit. And that yeast starts to come alive, and it does alcoholic fermentation. It goes into anaerobic respiration, and its waste products, what's coming out of it, are a little bit of alcohol and some carbon dioxide. And it's the carbon dioxide that makes bread rise. The alcohol is then burned off into the, when we cook bread, and there's not enough alcohol in it to do anything. And then, so that's done by yeasts and other microbes. And then lactic acid fermentation, the waste product is lactic acid, and again, only 2 ATP. So instead of exhaling carbon dioxide and water, it's carbon dioxide and lactic acid and the 2 ATP. So this happens in your body. It occurs in animal muscle cells, and then some bacteria can do this as well. You've probably experienced lactic acid fermentation in your muscle cells. If you ever have been exercising, and while you're exercising, you start to feel sore, like that burning sore. You're doing that last rep, and it's like burning. That's because your body's producing lactic acid instead of carbon dioxide and ATP. So you've got these waste products building up in your muscles, and that's what makes it burn. If you still hurt like a day later or 2 days later, that's not lactic acid still in your system. That's micro tears in your muscles. But this is just while you're exercising. So when you're exercising, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, you start breathing heavier and your heart starts beating harder. Why? What's the correlation? To get more oxygen to your muscles. You're right. You have to breathe heavier. Your heart has to pump harder to get more oxygen to your muscles to power them, while you're asking the mitochondria in the muscle cells to provide more energy for those muscle cells to work. Does that make sense? Sure it does. You betcha, Frable. Okay. What else? We also use this process in food as well. So if you like cheese, yogurt, or sauerkraut, which the Frable family does, those fermented foods are made by bacteria doing lactic acid fermentation. Okay, and alcoholic fermentation is done by yeast. I said we do bread. It's also how alcoholic beverages are created as well, from yeast. Okay, any questions? Okay, so there is a delightful video by the Amoeba Sisters. I will link it under this one. You should go watch it. So respiration, that's aerobic respiration, versus fermentation, that's anaerobic respiration. They are similar, but then they diverge. So they both take an organic compound and break apart the sugars in it. That's glycolysis. From glycolysis, and you don't need to know this. The first step in both of them is pyruvic acid and then ATP. If there is oxygen present, the cell goes into aerobic respiration, and it runs that Krebs cycle, and it does 36 ATP, and then waste products are carbon dioxide and water. If there is no oxygen present, it runs fermentation or anaerobic respiration instead, and it gives off lactic acid or ethanol, which is the type of alcohol that's produced. Okay, again, go watch the Amoeba Sisters because they're hilarious and awesome, and you need a reminder of all the things that I just said. Make sure you filled in your note guide and upload it. And the assignment should be linked on Canvas just after this one. And I think that's it. That's it. Okay. Welcome to the new quarter. The year's half over. This crazy year is halfway over, you guys. I'm talking, this is January 2021 for those people who find this post-apocalyptically. I hope you are well. I hope you are happy. If you are struggling in school during this crazy COVID year, please know that there is light at the end of the tunnel, almost. As long as we all do what we're supposed to continue doing, right? Or continue to do what we're supposed to be doing. Also, if you are working from home because you are quarantined, you need to let me know, and you need to make sure that you are staying on top of your work. You guys are doing a great job. This is a hard year, but you got to do it, and you can. Okay? All right. Be good. Be safe. Have fun, but safely. And I'll talk to you soon. Okay?